to Vertical Playpen. I'm your host, Phil, and today I am very, very excited because this is taking us in a level that we haven't often talked about on this podcast. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Kenneth Ginsburg, who has written a book that's coming out soon or is already out called Lighthouse Parenting. So the first thing I'm going to start with, Ken, is you were the person who coined this phrase, lighthouse parenting. So where was this epiphany? Where was this origin that led you to the metaphor of the lighthouse? Because as I read it, it is very resonant to me. It definitely strikes a chord in me. So what for you drew you to the lighthouse as your metaphor?
Well, the truth is that lighthouse parenting is about translating what we know scientifically from balanced parenting, also called authoritative parenting. The problem is that if I say to you, you should be an authoritative parent, what does that mean? And if I say to you, you should be a balanced parent, you're like, balance what? So the idea for me was to come up with phrase or a term. I even have practically a poem that goes with it to help people understand the concept. And my work as a pediatrician is to have people be able to apply what we know is best, right? And it's about putting it into application. So this comes from 6 decades of research, Phil, 6 decades of research that tells us that when we balance being loving and thoughtful and responsive to a young person, meaning letting them stretch when they're ready, as they're showing you they can, with setting the boundaries that keep them safe while they're stretching, right? That when we achieve that balance, they do better in school, they have lower risks, they're emotionally more healthy. And for me, most importantly, they have the closest, longest enduring relationship with their parents. We know that. Phil, it's more than science. It's common sense. You could literally ask your grandma and go like, hey, so what works? And she'd be like, well, you gotta love they gotta know they're loved and they gotta know you're keeping them safe at the same time, right? They would have said this. So now to answer your question directly, Phil, why the lighthouse metaphor? Because it says it all. When we think about a lighthouse, we don't think about something that controls us. We think about something that's a guide for us. We think about something that's stable. We are reminded that we're surrounded by waves, but that there's a strategy to get home safely. It's all there in the metaphor. And I know we're just beginning our conversation, Phil, but you want to hear that? Like, I think it's a poem, but it's definitely a few sentences. Can I tell you how I want
Please.
people to think about this?
Yeah.
I choose to be a lighthouse parent, a stable force on the shoreline from which my child can measure themselves against. I'll send my signals in a way that will choose to trust. I'll look down at the rocks to be sure they don't crash against them. I'll look into the waves and trust that they're going to learn to ride them, but I'm committed to prepare them to do so. Maybe most important to me, in terms of strengthening families for the long run, I'll remain a source of light they can seek whenever they need a safe and secure return. The metaphor teaches us balance, love, protection, just enough risk to grow, but still being allowed to stay safe. Not allowed, still being kept safe by the adults around you.
Yeah. And it feels to me as we talk, it's an aspirational and intentional methodology or thoughts around the style that we interact with our kids. I'm always looking at it and I'm actually looking at it from two lenses. I've got a daughter myself, and then I'm an educator, so I interact with students on those two layers. And adventure education really focuses on healthy risk taking under the umbrella of experiential education. We're really focusing on healthy risk taking. And that seems to be really applicable and in parallel to what you suggest as it relates to taking risks. What are some of the lighthouse parenting strategies that you know in the book that you think relate to taking risks?
So I'm actually going to start with where it begins because I'm very, very proud of this. And Phil, this is going to come back to your point, right? In almost all parenting articles, like just Google parenting and read the articles on go on Facebook. At the end, there's always a sentence or two that says, take care of yourself. I begin there. Be a stable force on the shoreline from which they can measure themselves against. I begin with role modeling and I begin with taking care of yourself. Why does that allow our children to take risks? Because when you take risks, you're going to fall down and you're going to have to get back up. You're going to stretch yourself to your limits, but you want to be able to rely on someone to keep you safe and to make sure you don't go beyond your limits. What is it that creates that level of safety in a young person to take healthy risks? It's knowing that someone's watching them, who cares about them, who will celebrate their stretching, but make sure that they don't break the rope. So whether you are a parent or an educator, being a role model and being someone secure that they can rely on is the key to giving a young person the safety to stretch.
And I think that, as I relate to the educators that I have had in the past, I think back to my childhood, you are often reminded of those great teachers, those great educators that you've had. And often it's because they cared about you. They demonstrated care and they role modeled that. I think for us in the adventure education realm, and as people are listening to this, it is a critical, and I bring this up so often, that is a critical consideration when you're about to ask your participants to go into their stretch zone. If they're going to get there, that you have to allow them to be comfortable first, that you have to be able to create a space where they're feeling safe before they're willing to take that stretch. And it comes down to, we use this phrase a lot in experiential education, connection before content. Try to connect before you deal with the content.
Amen. Amen. So, what you probably may not know is that most of my work is actually preparing professionals to be the adults the young people deserve in their lives. And what I teach really extensively, we're not talking about this today, but reaching teens, right? This is a super big toolkit, including 300 videos that teaches or guides professionals how to be the kind of people that young people deserve in their lives. It's relationship, the kind of relationship that actually sees someone, really sees them, including all of their strengths and all of their limitations. And when someone is seen and knows that they're cared about, they feel protected, they feel secure. And it is the security that allows you to grow and stretch. So whether you're talking about parenting, which is what this podcast was about, or you're talking about the teachers who do the experiential learning, you're talking about people who have the kind of relationships that offer security, the scaffolding in which young people can grow.
For you, feel like there's origin, my assumption would be, and you can clarify, would be that you are probably in your role as a pediatrician interacting with, you were having to band-aid instead of fix the source, the origin of where some of these problems were coming from. As kids were coming to you with stress and anxiety and physical ramifications of those, your mindset must have been, how do I fix this at the source? Is that where your passion lies now?
You literally defined my career. So I'm in my mid 60s. And when I started as a pediatrician, specifically as an adolescent specialist, so much of what we did was tell kids what they should and ought to not do. Doesn't work, right? Because it is stress that drives so much behavior and so much emotional distress and physical symptoms. And very early on in my career, I realized that that wasn't the model that worked, and that preparing adults to be the kind of people who had the kind of relationships that could scaffold youth to develop. And so, yes, Lighthouse Parenting defines how to parent in a way that's going to have your child be emotionally healthy and avoid the risks that you just talked about. It's the very basics. I can't do in my office very much. I can inspire, I can guide, but parents make all the difference. Kids develop in safe, secure relationships that are sustained. And what I will tell anybody who will listen is there are two groups of people that offer those safe, secure, and sustained relationships. I want it to be me, and sometimes it is, but I don't always get the sustained piece. It's parents and it's educators. It's parents and it's teachers, and throw in coaches that are the kind of people that create that safety, that security that allows people to stretch and grow. So yes, the words you were looking for, Phil, was I'm in primary prevention. I'm in not only preventing the risk that I went into a career to prevent, but I'm into building the scaffolding so the risk never even occurs. Because you're talking about healthy risk, there's unhealthy risk. And part of the way of avoiding the unhealthy risk is to have the confidence you gain from healthy risks.
What do you believe are some of the core, it's hard to even define this. What do you believe are some of the core reasons why we are not already at that point of being able to guide our students into healthy risk taking? What are contributing to some of the unhealthy risk taking as you see it from your profession?
Well, if I had to choose one word, it would be stress, because stress makes people uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable, you need to do something to become comfortable. Let's be clear, stress itself is not a bad thing. Emotional distress is not a bad thing. When a human being is seeing things around them that are uncomfortable, whether it's bullying, whether it's a society that's divisive, whether it's worrying about things at home, what defines mental health is that you're paying attention, that you're having those feelings. That doesn't make you unhealthy. That actually makes you healthy. The kids I worry about are the kids who shut down. The question is, what do you do with those feelings of discomfort? And our role in the universe, I think both of us, Phil, our role in the universe is to make sure that people have a repertoire of positive ways to deal with human distress, right? So that's one level of an answer. May I give another?
Please.
So now let's break down the word stress and let's begin talking about anxiety, which is kind of the catchword that so many people are using. Well, you know what makes people anxious? What makes people feel anxious is feeling like they're always on display. Everybody's watching them every moment, and that anything that they do could destroy them, right? And if you raise kids to fear stumbling, they won't even walk. And that is what happens with very heavy overprotection. The people who overprotect, these aren't people who don't love their kids. They love them intensely. They just believe that protecting them is the way to actually keep them safe. And what we need to do is we need to change their mindset. So let's go back to Lighthouse Parenting. Yes, protect your kids. Make sure they don't crash against the rocks, but have the confidence that they can be resilient. Believe that they're going to learn to ride the waves, but prepare them to do so. So Lighthouse Parenting is not hands-off parenting. Lighthouse Adulting is not see what they do. We are the scaffolding. We are the relationship. We build resilience, but when we overprotect, we create anxiety and kids shut down and they fear their own shadow. When we, on the other hand, give them the scaffolding to stretch safely, they gain confidence. Here's the three words you're waiting for, Phil. Preparation is protection, right? Oh, helicopter parenting, all these words, not protection. That's overprotection that makes a human being afraid to stretch. Pairing them, showing them how to stretch safely is protection, because we're not always going to have our kids in front of us, right? So let's imagine you're bubble wrapped. You said you have a 9-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah.
I know that if you're like every other dad and mom in the world, and I have two daughters, right? If you could wrap them in bubble wrap for the whole rest of their life and guarantee they never got emotionally hurt, maybe never even got a skin knee, you probably would check that box, right? but it's not an option. It's not an option. Like, what you have to realize is that your little girl is gonna become a woman. You're not always gonna be watching her, and you want her to have that confidence to be able to make her own decisions later. That's protection. And you know what else you want? Am I babbling too long? Can I
No,
babble a little
please
bit longer?
continue.
The other thing you want, Phil, for your little girl is you want her to never grow up so far away that your relationship stops. You want to have a relationship where when you're 95 and she's 65 or whatever, you're still super close. Where does that come from? That comes from raising her in a way that she sees you as a guide, not as someone controlling her. If she sees you as someone controlling her in her struggle towards independence, which we call adolescence, in her struggle towards independence, she'll resent you. And as soon as she can get away from you, she'll push you away when you're controlling. When you're a guy who loves, who protects, who keeps safe, but trusts her to learn, then she's going to want you in her life forever. That's the goal.
We are so parallel in the way that you're describing parenting and the way that I try to teach educators. It's very striking to me. We have a phrase, or I use this phrase for educators, that I hope that educators are no longer sages on the stage, but guides on the side. And I think that, like, that is, as you said, guide, that it just immediately placed that into my head of like, how many times have I said that to educators? Let me ask this a little bit more, almost philosophical, really. I think that the educational models that we currently have in place, the public school education models, are very restrictive in not allowing for what we're really discussing here, because it's standardization. And then I think about parenting as I've got my daughter. Someone used this phrase to me really recently. They said, there are some emotions that are socially aspirational emotions. And I really like that phrase because it sort of suggested that the world outside of your world looks upon your emotions in one light versus another. So you're trying to aspire to the community or socially. I think about that as like a parent who, my 9-year-old there are some kids in her class who have already got cell phones. And we're dealing with that interaction between, do we need this? And the argument is, well, if we give them a cell phone, there's a connection to us, so it protects them more. What's your thoughts on technology and society and how that becomes a barrier to what we're discussing as it is lighthouse parenting? What's the solve to that? I don't know if you have one.
Well, I don't have all the solutions, but I'll tell you that I don't think I've ever given a community talk or a professional keynote where someone at the end doesn't go, "What about social media?" It's something that everybody's so worried about. I don't have an answer, but I am willing to wax a little philosophical.
Please.
What I want people to understand is how to take what we know from science and what we know from our culture and common sense and put it all together to achieve balance. And when it comes to social media, there are also extremes. I think social media, there are elements of social media that are utterly terrifying. I think that hate is magnified, lies are produced, and I think it's terrifying. But I also work with young people who feel otherwise socially isolated because they're different and they don't fit into one box or another. And social media has been a lifesaver for them. So, like everything else, I don't think you're going to be shocked when Ken Ginsburg says, let's achieve balance, right? Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are good elements of social media. But what we never wanted to do is replace human connection, right? You find so many young people who are 15, 19, 25, who are embarrassed to make a phone call because it's awkward. So when people can only speak with their fingertips, we have a problem, right? We have a problem. When people believe what they see on social media and don't have the ability to discern what is misinformation, disinformation, including lies about humanity, but also lies even about what beauty is, right? If you think you're supposed to be Instagram perfect and you think those people in Instagram, that those faces haven't been altered, then how are you going to like your own? Right? If you don't know that once you go click, it lives forever, then you're not ready for social media. And the other point that I make all the time, Phil, is until your 9-year-old daughter can pick up the phone or open the door and say, I'm sorry, my dad's not available right now, or ma'am, I'm the right one for the job, by looking you in the eye, by selling yourself, by demonstrating through your physical presence, your sincerity and your capability, you're not ready for a phone. So we have to teach those very basic elements of human connection first. Then, once we enter this digital, potentially dangerous world, we have to lower the danger through educating. And we have to make sure that we never, ever take away the power of human connection. So, your 9-year-old, I'm going to let you decide because I don't have any say in when she gets the phone. But I'll tell you this, starting now, she doesn't sleep with that phone because I'll tell you, Phil, she's going to wake up at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning. She's going to get beeped through the night out of fear of missing out. She's not going to sleep. When she doesn't sleep, she's not going to do well in school. All this feeds anxiety. The other thing you're going to do, Phil, is when your family sits down for dinner or when you go for a hike or you go for, a rowboat ride, there are no phones. There are times when you have game night. There are times that phones are not there. And I'm not going to be able to directly quote this study, for which I apologize, but I know that there is a study that actually says that adolescent depression and discomfort is more correlated by how long their parents spend on social media than they do themselves, right? It is that availability and that scaffolding that protects kids. And let's stop blaming the kids. If we had a camera in every house's living room, we'd see a lot of dads having dinner going like this, right? And then you're missing the main thing you can give your child, which is like serious attention.
Yeah, I think that it comes right back to the role modeling that adults have in their students, in their kids' lives, that's that critical point. Looking at ourselves, how are we interacting when we are interacting with those students? Um, it kind of leads me to this next question I have about, emotions. I think that something that I think is really important is that we are more, as adults, more open and vulnerable to being able to discuss some of the emotions that we experience on a regular basis. We expect that almost of our kids, and there's a lot of buzz language about social emotional learning in the school environment. But I've often said to the educators I work with, I think it's a really important thing before we even step into teaching social emotional learning that we as adults also look at social emotional learning. And I do a lot of work with faculties about, let's start talking about it ourselves. What's your thoughts around the emotional vulnerability that I think adults need to demonstrate, not just in their ability to manage risk, but their own emotional states?
I'd like to answer this question in two parts, which I think is not surprising. So, as you may or may not know, or your listeners may or may not know, much of my clinical work is with youth experiencing homelessness and human trafficking. And they're the best humans on earth when they feel safe, when they feel safe. So let's talk about adolescents generally, and let's talk about adolescents who have had hard lives specifically. They are emotionally brilliant. We often talk about the adolescent brain as if it's incomplete, right? And people come up with these simple phrases to make you understand the adolescent brain, which I wildly and emphatically reject. The fact is that adolescents are emotionally brilliant, and the emotional part of their brain develops very, very quickly. They are highly intuitive. They need very quickly, as their bodies change, to be able to determine friend or foe, who's exploitative, who's not. As a result, they pick up every single nuance around them. They can read the inflection in your voice, your pupils, your eyes going like this. They read it all. And sometimes they overread it. So, Phil, don't be surprised when your daughter in a year or two looks at you and says, why are you looking at me like that? and you thought it was just your face, right? But it's because they are so emotionally brilliant. So the first thing that I would teach all or guide all of your parents and professionals is learn how to co-regulate. Learn how to manage your own emotions so that you can stay calm. Even if it means you have to take a walk, take a breath, go into the other room and shadow punch before you're actually dealing with the situation. Because you need to project calm to create the scaffolding upon which a young person can read your brain, the amygdala, the emotional center of their brain, reading the emotional center of your brain, going, hey, if that guy I trust thinks everything's cool here, it must be. And therefore, they will remain settled. And as they remain settled, their thinking capacities will rise. True of parents, true of professionals, right? That's point number one, co-regulation. If you don't know the word co-regulation, think of it this way. You're on an airplane. There's turbulence. You don't look at the guy next to you going, you look at the flight attendant. If they're still serving snack mix, you're chill. You look at the person you consider credible and you say, what are they experiencing? That's point number one. Point number two, Phil, I speak to all adults, all parents, with a special emphasis on men. We want for every young person, male and female, to understand that expressing emotions is an act of strength, that being vulnerable is part of the human condition, that when we are vulnerable, we draw other people in and we gain strength when we do. It is human connection that allows us to get through anything. And when we convey to humans that a strong person is someone who gets through it or handles it alone, we deny them the most protective thing we actually know, which is that as individuals we can break, but joined like a bundle of sticks, we're nearly immovable. We know this. And when I, as a man, when you, as an adventurous man, are not only adventurous in whatever it is you do physically in the world, however you stretch, but you're adventurous by revealing who you are, what your feelings are, including your vulnerability. And when you do so, you communicate very clearly that that is what masculinity looks like, that that is what strength looks like. You are making it safe for everyone around you, male and female, to feel.
It's beautifully phrased, and I often have to redefine for a lot of people what adventure means. And this is my as, definition of it, but it includes uniqueness, full experience. There's education components to it. You'll learn something, but then there's risk, and risk is not just physical, but emotional and social. So I 100% implore people to consider as an adventure educator or as educator in general. If you are wanting to role model an adventurous state, it's got to be in the terms of emotion and social also. It can't just be physical. Let me ask you this, just to round it out. I will put this, and I say this with true sincerity. I've read the book. I love the book. I think this is a book that all educators, everyone listening to this, needs to have access to this book and has read it, because beyond if you've got a kid or not, if you are, I say this to educators, with great power comes great responsibility. It's the Spider-Man quote, but we have great power and great responsibility for the next generation that we work with. So I encourage you to read the book. For you, Ken, what is your hope with this book? What is the hope, let's say 10 years, 20 years down the line from the publication of the book, what is your hope that this book has provided?
I want young people to thrive. And what I know makes the difference in whether or not they thrive is whether they have the adults that surround them, that give them the room to stretch securely. You know, to be a little bit melodramatic, Phil, why do we love? So that kids learn that they can be worthy of being loved, right? Why do we protect? So that kids learn that they should be kept safe, right? So when we overprotect, they don't learn that. They don't learn that they should be kept safe. They learn how to never feel safe. But when we allow kids to stretch safely because we are loving them, they're going to grow to be secure. And gosh, I think you probably asked for one sentence, but I got to give you one more, which is we live in a world where we overemphasize independence, right? And we are raising our kids as if our goal is to have them be successful when they're 18 and all else doesn't matter. Well, I want to build a world in which we get back to understanding the power of interdependence, of relying on one another across the generations. And that is going to come when we serve as guides. We stop being the extremes. We're not overprotective because they're going to run, and we're not free range and permissive because they're going to think I don't need you in my life. I want them to know, yeah, stretching is awesome. And having someone who really cares about you being there is also awesome.
Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Ken. I'm going to end with a reminder that the book is called Lighthouse Parenting, Raising Your Child with Loving Guidance for a Lifelong Bond. And I'm going to end with a quote that actually sits at the top of the book that's from Upworthy that says, Dr. Ken Ginsburg's advice for parents is like a hug, TED Talk, and masterclass rolled into one. Thank you so much, Ken, for joining me on the podcast. And I will put all the links to all the information in the description for you to check out. And I'll see you on the next one.